Are you strategic? The answer can make or break your business. Welcome to Strategic Minds, the podcast where we'll do a deep dive into conversations with extraordinary leaders and world-class performers to learn how they think, plan, and act strategically. I'm your host, Rich Horwath, author of 8 books on strategic thinking, including my newest book, Strategic. And my vision is to teach the world to be strategic. Now, let's explore Strategic Minds.
We're stuck.
What do we do? I have no idea.
You need a new strategy.
We need a more dynamic strategy.
The strategy?
You have to strategize.
But you won't strategize.
Let's talk a little strategy.
Welcome to Strategic Minds. I'm excited to chat with my guest today, Ines Garcia. Ines is the author of Nature's Blueprint for Business, Harnessing the Inner Power of Edges, a book that translates the principles of biomimicry and ecological systems into practical tools for leaders. Her work focuses on how organizations can use tension, edges, and natural design strategies to innovate, adapt, and build resilience. In addition to her writing, Ines brings 2 decades of experience helping businesses improve value delivery and reduce waste through agile practices and digital transformation. She's a recognized Salesforce MVP, creator of the Agile Retrospective Game, and an active contributor to global Agile and Salesforce communities. With deep expertise in systems thinking, circularity, and complexity science, she helps leaders apply nature strategies to the way they work, collaborate, and design their organizations. Ines, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Ines, I'm fascinated by your background and your topics of expertise, and I'd love to understand a little bit about what originally inspired your interest in biomimicry and applying nature's mechanisms to organizations.
Well, how far we go? Maybe I need to tell you a little bit of my work and my journey around the space of work, which I come from communications background. That's basically advertising, marketing, PR, matters of state. I have a double degree on that like long time ago. And I worked as a PR for Segway Catalonia. As part of my work was getting media coverage with political figures, to which in part was a lucky one because it enabled me a free August. Everybody disappears then.
Right.
And that I took as an opportunity to travel to the UK from Barcelona. And that then has ended up UK being my home. And over time, that work of communications took me to internal communications within organizations and getting more involved with digital solutions. And whilst technology can be a great enabler, technology by itself doesn't do very much. And I'm someone that is on an ever-learning path. I can help myself. So back then, from project delivery, I came across lean and agile sort of practices becoming more important in the digital space in technology. And that sort of really clicked with me, that idea of iterative and incremental approach to trying to deliver something whilst we increase our ability to predict what we can do and also reduce risk. And so, that kind of work of reducing waste is often looking around reducing waste of time. And with my practice, I evolved that to also reduce waste of effort, of finance, materials, energy, which I think maybe we get into a little bit later. What else? Back in 2019, I went on a quest of how can I make my own company better. And that research quest of 2 years of finding organizations that embedded sustainability as a fabric layer rather than an afterthought. That led into the Sustainable Happy Profit book, and as a way to share those learnings beyond just one podcast, one client, and one session at a time. And then took me to the executive program with Cambridge in terms of circular economy, which then led me into the concept of biomimicry. And I can explain a little bit more of that if you're interested later. But essentially, my work is quite diverse, as you can probably tell. So helping organizations to reduce waste, to focus on what matters, and to leave the place better than how we found it. Place as a people, the products, and obviously the planet.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's an awesome overview of where have you been and what's inspired you. It's interesting. And as I've read some research that shows when we compare nature's solutions to problems with the patent database, so when people file patents for innovation, there's really only about a 10% overlap between nature's solutions and the ones that we as human beings have patented. So I think there's a world of opportunity for people to use nature to better solve problems in their organization and in their business. So I'd be interested, how, Ines, would you explain biomimicry in simple, practical terms for folks?
Well, biomimicry is, Janine Benyon says, innovation inspired by nature. So biomimicry is a process that outlines several principles that are based on 3.8 billion years of evolution. They are the principles that creates conditions that are conducive to life, of why we all live here, right? And the systems that sustain our life on Earth. And is this understanding of we have an archive of almost 4 billion years of existence to tap into for solutions, rather than, just blank canvas, which often is where we start when we're trying to solve a problem. So, what are the different conditions by which our organizations can optimize and have a sense and a lens to see the world through?
And are there particular situations, as you've, and again, in your book, you do a wonderful job starting with stories with people to give us that practical application. Are there certain challenges, Ines, that you've run into where nature is specifically effective in helping people think through challenges, issues, problems that they may be working through, either on culture, process, systems, those types of things?
Well, many.
Okay.
I think perhaps one of the life principles that I find quite helpful for leaders to see challenges through is this principle of being locally attuned and responsive, because there is no like one size fit all in nature, right? If we think even a tree, a baobab versus an olive tree, they are appropriately local to their conditions. They will tap into cyclical processes, feedback loops, so they can work in a way that is better and they can tune up with what's happening. And locally attuned means also using the materials, the energy that we have already available. What resources, humans and otherwise, do you have at hand that's going to help you in the process that you want to put in place or evolve? Maybe you already have it in place. So where can you take the ingredients that already exist to make the whole that is greater than the sum of its parts? And the question is often is how can your organization then be locally attuned and responsive when we often do forecasting 18 months in advance? Life is beyond that linear. And how can you have an emergent process, especially if you want to innovate? The best that you can do with emergence is poke, see the responses of that poking, and then tune and adjust accordingly from what you just learned. So it's this idea of cyclical processes, iterative, cooperative relationships, and the use of feedback loops to inform decisions.
Yeah, those are wonderful practices there. And the principle of locally attuned and responsive, I think, is great for leaders listening out there. It's oftentimes where we're looking at national trends or international, global patterns and things that are happening, but do we really listen to what's happening locally? And I know for many leaders that I work with that are at a more senior level, sometimes, and as the challenge is, they're not locally attuned. They're seeing the national, international things, but they're not really locally attuned. So I think that's a great prompt and a question for people to really think through is, are we really being locally attuned and are we responsive to that local issue? And as one of the things we talked about in our previous conversation was this idea of ecotones, which I wasn't as familiar with. I'd love for you to share a little bit about your perspective on ecotones and then maybe how we can translate that from a business perspective.
All right, so ecotones specifically, because we talk about many different edges, but yeah, I think ecotones, even the concept, the term itself has been around for 100, maybe 150 years or something. And the word comes from ecology with the addition of ton as the suffix, meaning tension, right? So it's describing areas where tension in between two ecologies. And so the word really exists to explain an in between, that is important enough for us to even discuss them, right? And if we think about them and we look at our next natural space, you will see the opportunity for where things meet is an opportunity, a space to collect materials and exchange nutrients. Like I often talk about well, if you stop mowing a corner in your garden, you very quickly see how that space, it becomes an area that collects resources and therefore it has higher exchange. Or if you stop hoovering a corner in your house, you will quickly see how it collects resources and higher exchange. So we have been conditioned. I think it's important to think that we tend to think quite narrowly, like quite into minimalism in the aim of efficiency, and that's when we sort of minimize the mess to help us see through with that idea of streamlining. We kind of miss the whole and the ability to see, well, the forest from the trees. So that's, I don't know if traditional approach is the right way to describe it, but we are missing the ability to see holistically with what's happening, the interrelationship between the different parts of a system. It's kind of reductionism, right? And so when we focus on the individual elements, like where a team starts and an ends, for example, it may have its place, but zooming in also misses out, right? So what you want to give yourself is a little bit of perspective so you can get understanding of that bigger picture and interdisciplinary items that do matter. So how can you rethink some of the problems that you have at hand if you give a little bit further space and view?
Yeah, that principle of zooming in and out, I think, is really interesting. And as if you worked with any organizations or groups or leaders where they were able to innovate or to create new value or maybe improve process or systems by thinking about those that in between space and then going from the close view to, as you said, zooming out to see that big picture. Any examples that you'd be thinking of from that standpoint?
Yeah, I can talk to you about, well, one agile, lean practice that is commonly used is value stream mapping. And we often use value stream mapping to look at within the organizational boundaries, ideally across your value chain, how can you reduce waste of time, right? And infusing some of the circular economy principles in terms of keeping your products and materials in use for as long as possible. When I was working with an innovation hub of one of the biggest utility companies here in the UK, just doing that exercise only for the return process, it gave us the ability to see not only the amount of resale opportunities sitting in a warehouse, but also the warehouse cost reduction. So sometimes giving yourself that space to be able to see beyond a department, a product, a process, or a section of your customer service is going to give you the opportunity to even create another revenue streams.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I've used the value chain with many organizations. I like the idea of the value stream mapping to really take it another level. And like you said, just the ability to identify waste. I think oftentimes leaders were thinking about what can we add, or we need more resources. But you bring up a wonderful point that sometimes it's not about adding things; it's about reducing, taking waste out of the system from a process, a time standpoint. So I think those are great ideas there. I want to take a quick moment to thank everyone who's been sharing the Strategic Minds podcast. Your support is what helps us grow and reach more leaders who want to think and act strategically. If you've been finding value in these conversations, I'd love for you to follow in their footsteps. Share the podcast with a few friends or colleagues in your network who you think would benefit from becoming more strategic in their work. Your word of mouth makes all the difference, and I truly appreciate it. Are you a high potential leader but feel like you're spread too thin? Too many priorities, too many fire drills, and not enough time to think? Then how exactly are you going to prepare yourself to get promoted to the next level? Simple, you practice. The Strategic Fitness System is your place to practice the skills and gain the confidence to prepare to succeed at the next level. At the heart of the system are 50 workouts, each of which consists of a video, reading, tool to practice, and digital journal. And the beauty is, each workout only takes 10 to 20 minutes to complete. Research shows that nearly 30% of leaders fail in their first 18 months of a new leadership role. Are you willing to take that risk with your career? If you're ready to take control of your future and develop the skills and confidence to crush it at the next level, then subscribe to the Strategic Fitness System today and build your personal competitive advantage. For more information, visit strategyskills.com. After all, practice makes profit. The other part that I'd be interested in, and as from your standpoint, is the idea of friction. Sometimes we think of friction either positively or negatively. How do you see friction in nature, and how might that apply from a business perspective?
Like in the book, one of the things I try to do is fill it with like real life examples. And now that you talk about friction makes me think of the story of Michelle, like reframing conflict as a movement through creative tension. I think his story sort of outlines quite nicely what can tension or friction bring. And if we were talking about ecotones, an ecotone is a space that provides that area that is ever in flux. So it's going to have physical tensions and is formed by convergence, like salt, fresh water, tides, upstream events, turbulence within the structure itself. So when you combine elements beyond sort of a static space, it can create, a nursery for many fishes that wouldn't exist otherwise. It's a space that is more nurtured because there is more movement. And for our organizations, these ideas of tapping into each other ideas rather than resist and quiet voices down, I think it can give us an edge.
Yes, absolutely. Another concept that you've shared with me is this idea of bending without breaking. And I'd be interested, from a nature perspective, what does that look like? And then how might you counsel leaders in businesses to think about bending without breaking?
Yeah, so we could think of it as a function of resilience rather than revert to an original state after a setback. So if there is an issue with the original state that caused the setback, why would you want to go back to what it was? So this idea of bending without breaking is a way to sort of reshape into something that is more appropriate, that is more useful, that is more successful. And I think we can think that bending without breaking through trees quite well, right? It bends with the wind rather than snapping. It may as well lose some branches every now and then, but for a reason. And also it shapes its own structure. It helps the tree itself to withstand further prevailing winds or prevailing conditions. So I find helpful to remind myself that tipping points are not linear. And so how we can constantly tune up, our body does it all the time. If after an injury or stress, then have the ability to learn from that into what you're becoming rather than going back. Even staying still is going backwards.
Yes, and that's fascinating too, because I think sometimes we relive conversations, we relive our thoughts day in and day out. And to your point, we're going backwards. And to your point, if we're staying still, we're basically moving backwards. So this idea of resilience and moving things forward, progressing, I think is fascinating from a business standpoint. And as you've worked with leaders, I guess, what's been one of the biggest challenges in getting folks to think about that resilience. And, I like that example you used, with the tree and the wind and bending, but not snapping, because we do see people, snapping, so to speak, sometimes in business settings where they may not be getting agreement with a proposal or an idea. And instead of, being resilient and looking for progress, they do snap and kind of revert back to the thoughts that they had. Is there any counsel that you'd share that you've observed or found helpful in getting leaders to adopt that progress mentality with resilience versus moving backwards and snapping?
A big question there. Okay, let's tap into something that hopefully is not too controversial, which is I think that we should quiet our cleverness and observe the natural patterns that govern us. Right? We are governed by natural laws, regardless if we are aware or not, or if we like it or not, and help ourselves to learn from what's proven strategies that has been evolving for billions of years. Right? So, what happens when natural elements meet? They converge. Are we creating spaces in our organizations for convergence? Right? What happens when we get connections or emerging connections, things bond in nature? Or what happens when paths cross, then we get an intersection, and when the different parts of nature becomes involved with one another, we get a tangle, and those things create abundance. So how can we quiet our cleverness when confronted with a challenge? Because often when we have a challenge, we look at the problem or trying to find the solution in quite narrow way, and instead, how does nature solve this problem? Because the solutions are already here. They in the living beings, the ones that have been fine-tuning for those billions of years. So I would encourage leaders to breathe in and look outside.
Wonderful. That's great, simple advice. I love that. And you talked about the phrase I've heard is biologizing the question. So I love that what you shared. How would nature solve this problem? How would nature create competitive advantage in this situation, or better cooperation in this situation? There's lots of examples out there. You do a wonderful job in your book sharing some examples. What would be some examples, Ines, from your perspective on adaptation? I think, based on what you've shared around resilience, our ability to adapt is going to be important as well. Are there examples that you would share around adaptation from nature, and then how we might apply that from a leadership standpoint?
If we continue maybe with the trees, thinking about trees. So let's think of a section, maybe the part of the tree that is above ground, right? Like the branches grow, they're gonna adjust the size and the numbers and the cells within, even the different types or the thickness of the walls of the tree, and even the compounds with it, the different chemical composition. If we think maybe of the hardwood trees, they make thicker rings on the top sides of the branches, and they fill with sort of stretchy cellulose fibers that accumulate. Why that? Because they want to give the pull tension upwards, while the softwood trees build up the lower side with rigid because they want to resist the stress of compression. So this is very structural, specific way to support in a way that is adaptable, that is working at odd angles and curves, and this needs to have it built in within the material at the micro scale, right? And if we think about structures or how we build at scale, even I would think at micro in our organizations, macro thinking markets, maybe, or bigger human systems, then we narrowly focusing the finished material when we think of a tree, right? We see a tree and we think, a resource. And so we're missing out that wisdom of the evolved strategies. And we end up building large straight beams and planks with lots of waste. And that takes a lot of transport, effort, energy to create. That creates pressure at very specific points. So you need to reinforce them, and also gives limits of the options of the design because we have those strange long beams. And so the resulting effect is that then we need more material for the reinforcement. And then we look for other materials to patch the points of high stress instead of letting them form or inform the function that you're trying to accomplish. So some of the things that you may want to look at in your organization is how your structure is fractal enough to create spaces of friction, tension, building up, call it cross-pollination, where you enable that conversion, because structure informs culture. Culture does not derive from a set of values. So how we organize ourselves and how we behave with each other has a chemical reaction and therefore an ability to contribute that sometimes we don't think of. So spaces matter.
A lot of great things to unpack there that you just shared. The cross-pollination piece, I think, is interesting. What have you observed as a best practice potentially with organizations to create that cross-pollination? Because as you just elegantly described, structure informs culture. So how might a leader think about creating that cross-pollination from an organizational structure perspective?
In the book, we go through different options, and I think context is everything. Again, it's not a sort of one size fits all. Often we took frameworks to help us, but frameworks don't have our interest at heart. Frameworks don't know you, so they can't really. So with that in mind, I think rather than designing very linear and hierarchical structures, what you want to create is fractals. If we think, for example, depends on the function that we're trying to achieve. So flowing of information, or how does nature flows water? You have fractal structures with more relationships at the end, at the tipping spaces, and you have a reroute for over and underflow. So what's happening today in your organization when a area gets stress overloaded? Do you have the ability for that to reroute in something that is of use, or does it create waste of energy and depletes the members within? So I think we were talking about trees. Think of the trees, the fractal design. There are very common natural patterns for flow of fluids, communication, information that we can tap into. Perhaps another one that is also helpful, that I'm doing some work with an organization at the moment, is this, I'll call it triadic connections. And even the capillary system looks quite similar. So nodes of 3. And it creates a space of have certain redundancy to be able to operate the best. So how could you infuse this idea of triadic connections within your organization so that you can create that redundancy that generates institutional knowledge to be passed on beyond one person, one department, one structure, one policy?
Yeah, I love the idea of flow. And again, I would challenge all of the folks listening out there to really do a deep dive into your structure and think about what is the flow. And as Ines talked about, what are potential bottlenecks and areas of overstress or too much tension or too much stress that's causing us to weaken or to not respond as much as we could potentially respond. So I love that idea of really doing a deep dive, thinking about flow from an information, a communication perspective, product, services, all of those things, that idea of flow. And I think, using fractals as one of the pieces is a great idea there. Ines, one of the things we see today is people being inundated with information, raw data, and I think because of that, people feel that they're on this activity treadmill where they're just running. And sometimes there's this urgency that doesn't necessarily have purpose. what are your perspectives on how to move away from just simple urgency and activity to something that maybe gives us a greater purpose and a greater agenda?
Hmm. Urgency to agency, yeah.
Yes, excellent.
So I see that you like the catchphrase that we have at the Coalition of the Willing. So this is the hardest step in any change. It's crossing the chasm from theoretical agreement, we must do something, into tangible, impactful action. Like, and this is how. So, for example, in the coalition, we've been running this cohort since 2023, and the idea is, well, our quest is to move project and product professionals from that urgency into agency. So it's not just living with knowledge, but it's also the how to on circular economy, sustainable development goals, complexity science, yet also the experience, because it's a whole month application program, and helping creating spaces and encouraging everybody to move from urgency to agency is through embedded experience. Sometimes we put a lot of effort on L&D, like learning and development, but consumption of information is not just what we need. We often, what we have is an overload of information. But how can you have a laser focus into what are you trying to achieve, hence function, and how can you support those members and spaces within to achieve that, and creating those environments, the structures that support that to happen.
Yeah, and share with us maybe some of your insights. You talked about the cohorts and so forth that have been going through the program, from this idea of urgency to agency. What have been some of your findings, maybe any surprises, any insights that you've found through this work so far?
So one is that change will happen when the conditions are right. Maybe that's why I'm like saying create the conditions for change to happen. And having insiders with demand the skills as enablers within your organization matters, right? So L&D matters. Also that you can have incredible ripple effects by change agents. So people that wants to be part of the solution, and people do care. We often think that some of the challenges that we have in our own sort of human systems are too big, but you have the ability and you have people. You'll be surprised when you start bringing some of the concepts. People wants to be part of the solution. So think of the members, the states, tapping into your existing locally attuned materials and energy, because there is probably more than you give credit for.
Yeah, excellent. And one of the things you talk about in the book, which was fascinating, because I don't have a lot of experience with the idea of regenerative land design and some of the principles there. And I think we've touched on some of the things already, but are there learnings for business leaders around regenerative land design, some of those principles, either from a physical or even a virtual perspective, that might be helpful?
Well, I kind of love that you're talking about regenerative land design, because part of my work, I also operate at the edges. So I've been sort of incorporating some of these ideas of leaving the place better, in a better state, sort of focusing on the items like the solar aspect, the wind, the water management, the key structures that you have in your spaces, the footfall. How can you create them as convergence, right? And for those to maybe tapping what's called ecosystem services. So can the air, the water, the habitat, temperature control, the spaces of convergence. So there is a lot to tap there into, like how can we learn from place, like meaning from the ecology, the macro view, to the land form, the water catchments that you're on, and then you sort of work through into the site, the specifics, and understanding that bigger picture that we are part of your region even, and then you zoom in for the specifics of your particular site. But if you have a water catchment coming with certain amount of water coming through, you need to account it for how you're gonna sort of slow it, sink it, and get it back into the water table. And also think about sort of the transition. I don't know if transition is the right word, perhaps evolution or maybe regeneration of place that's going to require collaboration and expertise from like a lot of different professionals, designers, engineers. We talked about supply chain earlier, right? Those procurement, waste reduction specialists. So how can you create regenerative spaces that cleans your air and your water, creates convergence, so that cross-pollination can happen. And also you can tap into the expertise that can help you accelerate that progress, right? So my message normally is to encourage leaders to be part of the solution and to continue working together towards an economy that will generate abundance for us all.
Yes, well said. And the idea of regeneration, especially as we flip from one calendar year to the other, is really important. So I think some of the principles that Ines has shared with us are really going to be helpful as we move from one year to the next and thinking about, are there ways, even organizationally, but individually, collectively as teams, that we can regenerate and find some new ways to explore and progress and move forward together. And as you've worked with organizations, what's your perspective on strategy? We hear the word strategy thrown around a lot. I'm sure you've heard it in both, the for-profit, nonprofit space. How do you think about strategy as it relates to some of the things that we've been chatting about today?
So if we think maybe of like this regeneration in terms of your organization in itself, it has a lot of parallels because we tend to think just on our cognitive layer, but that doesn't really abstract us from our cellular one, meaning like we are biology, we are chemistry, we are physics. So parallels there for me are the idea of creating healthy environments, the cycle management, the resource optimization, but leaving the members in a better state. So this idea of moving both the land and the organization from process depletion to self-renewal and vitality. So creating those conditions that are conducive to life. And then one thing we sort of talked a little bit earlier, you and I before the session today, is I think that we are in this time of moving from competitive advantage to collaborative advantage, right? Because given that we are in a finite planet, when we omit our natural order through only our imagined cognitive order, we're missing out. So our artificial structures that we often look at, even within organizations, teams, department, budgets, they are used for either splitting or competing for resources, gaining terrain, often gaining influence, organization politics. The structures are very linear, they are very compartmentalized, they don't encourage flow and exchange. And for me, it's like the story of the goose and the golden eggs all over. So these invented structures like role hierarchies, organizational charts, those are from the 1800s. They archaic, and we haven't really evolved them. And especially the bigger and the more mature the organization is, the imagined separation between the elements is wider. The definition of those very roles is sort of, our modules are tighter, and the belief for being a completely unique and separate entities is higher. So what is interesting is that 3.8 billion years of a strategy refinement has a very different take. It's a take that generates abundance.
Yeah, and I underlined when you said the idea of collaborative advantage, and even it's interesting. And as I lead strategy workshops with senior teams often, and even, they'll talk about competitive advantage with external competition, but to your point, collaborative advantage even refers, I think, and can be helpful for leaders internally. Sometimes we have silos where there isn't flow between one group, maybe it's marketing, sales, operations, IT, and there is a lack of flow. So this idea of collaborative advantage, again, for the folks listening out there, I would encourage you to think about, how are we creating collaborative advantage, both internally with bridging the silos, and then externally, looking at, as Ines really beautifully said, talked about, increasing that abundance for everyone versus just ourselves. So I think some great principles there. Ines, any other advice that you would share? One of the things we talked about was this idea of ecosystems, and you do a nice job in the book describing the ecosystems. There's a lot of things that can fall into that. And maybe sometimes leaders can get overwhelmed with all of the information, the data that's within the ecosystem that they're operating. Do you have any thoughts on how leaders might start to filter some of the things that might be more salient, more important in the ecosystem? So as opposed to getting overwhelmed by everything in the ecosystem, they're looking for key factors or key criteria that help define the ecosystem.
So I think there are three main areas that you can look at the lens or try to evolve through: strategy, culture, and operations.
Mm-hmm.
So how can you move those from zero to the positive sum game instead? How can you move to a shared value creation and like a whole ecosystem success? If we tap a little bit into the idea of circular economy, if we are operating in this economy of make waste, we take stuff from Earth, we make stuff with it, and then we waste it. Like 90% of the materials that we use in our products are wasted. Imagine if you keep them within your value chain or don't even put them there to start. What a savings of energy, transport, effort, materials cost, right? So hence this idea of moving from competitive advantage, from cooperative or collaborative advantage across your value chain. We all are part of the potential solution. So sort of challenging that obsession of, my organization finished here, this my tidy linear organization structure, into those partnerships of across your whole value chain, because we own this together.
Yes. And so I'd love to close our conversation today then, Ines, with your responses to 6 questions, just so folks can get to know you on a little bit more personal level as we finish up. So number 1, what was your first job?
Okay. Maybe first and fast, I should say, was working with my grandparents in a wine shop.
Oh, okay. Excellent. And what types of things were you doing for them in the wine shop?
I think I was in charge mainly to charge sort of in the counter, saying hello, bye to everybody, and also learning my mathematical skills with them.
Wonderful. Number 2, what's your favorite vacation spot?
At the moment, I think I'm going to say Devon, which is the county where I live. I recently moved here, so I'm kind of focusing in discovering every bit of the county and sort of the southwest of England.
Great. Number 3, what's the one word that best describes you?
Curious?
Yes, based on our conversation, I think that absolutely is appropriate. Number 4, what's one book that's had significant impact on your development?
Whole Brain Living from Jill Bolt.
Okay. Whole Brain Living. Thank you. Number 5, what's one piece of advice you'd most like to share with other people that would fit on the bumper sticker on the back of a car?
It's going to be a question. Are you willing to be part of the solution?
Very thought-provoking. Good. And number 6, what's the most exhilarating moment you've experienced in your professional life?
I think holding a copy of my first book back in 2020. I mean, at so many levels, who will have said?
Yes, I could absolutely see that. Well, Ines, you've really given us a lot of wonderful food for thought. You've shared some great principles, some wonderful tips and techniques. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for being a guest on the show today and for helping us all to think a little bit more about how we can improve what we do and how we do it.
Thank you for having me. And looking forward to see what emerges from the edges.
Any insights?
You play to win the game.
Any further insights?
You don't play to just play it.
Insightful.
I want winners.
I played the game to win.
I want people that want to win.
It's very insightful.
Our winsight or idea for advantage today comes from Ralph Waldo Emerson, who said, "Nature has made up her mind that what cannot defend itself shall not be defended." As you think about your organization, your business, your offerings, ask yourself, are we doing the best job we can building capabilities, skill sets, and knowledge that defends a position that we deserve to win in the industry? If we're not creating capabilities and knowledge that are separating ourselves or creating that moat that creates advantage for ourselves, then we're not going to be able to defend our position in the market. So think about, are we defending? Are we creating capabilities that act as a defense so that we can be positioned how we want to be positioned in the future? Thank you for listening to today's episode of Strategic Minds. I hope this conversation gave you some valuable insights that you can apply to your business and put into action. If you found this episode helpful, we'd greatly appreciate it if you'd leave a short review, maybe even a 5-star review on your podcast player. And thank you to everyone who's been sharing the podcast. Your support really helps us grow and make the world a little bit more strategic. If someone in your network could benefit from this conversation, please feel free to share it with them. If your team is ready to strengthen its strategic thinking and planning skills and get beyond the day-to-day tactical grind, visit strategyskills.com. There you can explore our workshops, online courses, strategic coaching, free Strategic Thinker newsletter, and my latest book, Strategic. You can also take your leadership development to the next level with the Strategic Fitness System, our state-of-the-art executive development platform. Until next time, remember, be strategic to be your best.